today is, I suppose, a special occasion. It's recognising the first ever recipient of the T.J Effeney Award, and you would have seen a bit about that in, I suppose, the blurbs and flyers for this webinar. But Terry Effeney is, I suppose, one of our great leaders of the power sector in Australia, who passed away several years ago. And as part of the recognition of that, the API Energy Queensland, which is both Ergon Energy and Energex, and the Effeney family came together and developed the T.J Effeney Award as a way of recognising Terry's legacy and the values and contributions he made to the power sector. It's a pretty fantastic opportunity. So it's a $20,000 scholarship to undertake a personal program of study to develop the power sector person's capability. It can be international and it can be domestic, and Jack is our first ever recipient. So I'm going to introduce Jack in a moment, and we'll talk to Jack about his experiences with this $20,000 scholarship. But to introduce Jack briefly, so Jack is one of our API Bursary student graduates. The T.J Effeney Award is only available to API Bursary students. He spent 4 years as a bursary student at RMIT in Melbourne doing a Bachelor of Engineering, gaining first class honours, and he undertook 2 API bursary placements during his studies with Wilson Transformers and with Oricon. And in his last year of study, he put forward a fantastic, very competitive application for the T.J Effeney Award and was the chosen recipient and did some fantastic things with that. So with that, I will stop showing slides and Jack and I will get into the meat of things and talk about Jack's experiences. Welcome, Jack. Thank you.
Hi, David. Thanks.
Have you with us. So with Jack, a key part of the T.J Effeney Award is sharing knowledge. So as preparation for this, we put some questions to Jack that cover a range of his experiences. So the format we're going to go through here is a bit of a Q&A from me with Jack, but I encourage you to think of any questions you might have and to shoot them through on that Q&A panel that Kendall mentioned earlier, and we'll pick them up a little bit later in the webinar. So Jack, first thing I'd like you to do is, I suppose, just to tell us a bit about yourself and your background and the power qualifications that you've developed and what you're doing now.
Yeah, David. Well, I'm originally from Perth in Western Australia, and I spent part of my childhood in the UK and then the rest of it, as well as my early adulthood, in Gladstone, Queensland. After completing high school, I then undertook an apprenticeship in Gladstone, where I studied electrical engineering concurrently, part-time via distance education. And then following my apprenticeship, I then worked at Gladstone Power Station as an industrial electrician. In 2015, I moved to Melbourne to complete my graduate studies at RMIT, as you said, and was lucky to receive a bursary from the API in the same year. And as part of that, I undertook placements, as you said, at Wilson Transformer Company, as well as Oricon. At the moment, following completion of my undergrad degree in 2018, I then started to undertake a PhD at RMIT as well, which is where I'm currently based at the moment.
That is quite a diverse background, Jack.
Yeah.
So great to have you. So I suppose a question for me is, the $20,000 scholarship for T.J Effeney, it's pretty open-ended. It's to undertake a professional development opportunity that will grow your knowledge, grow your connections, and give you a chance to share that with other people. So what was your passion and what were you hoping to develop when you put forward your proposal?
Well, my passion is really around power systems and specifically power system dynamics and modeling, as well as renewable energy integration. So what I was really hoping to get out of the experience was firstly to broaden my knowledge and skills in the energy sector, specifically relating to these topics, power system dynamics, power electronic inverters, etc. And I was really able to do this through developing a comprehensive professional development program that encompassed both academia and industry as part of the award. I was also hoping to gain exposure to a new part of the industry, which I hadn't seen before. And obviously, as well as part of this, I also wanted to increase my personal network with power systems experts across the world to support my development in the future.
So at a practical level, what did you actually do? So I know that you spent 4 months in the US, but there's a lot more detail to that. So what are some of the things that you put together as, you know, for your activity?
Well, there were three main things. The first week in the US, I spent in Atlanta, Georgia, where I attended the IEEE Power and Energy Society General Meeting. This is an annual flagship conference of the Power and Energy Society, which brings together around 2,000 to 3,000 people from academia and industry, where they discuss and present issues and solutions to these problems. Following that, I then moved on to the University of Michigan, where I carried out research under the supervision of Professor Ian Hiskins. And then during my time there, Ian was very kind enough to help me obtain a visit to ITC Transmission in Novi, Michigan, which is about 40 minutes away from Ann Arbor. And during my time at ITC, I was able to shadow engineers across a range of departments to see what they do and what sort of challenges they're facing, what sort of work they're carrying out.
So quite a broad range of experiences there, from experts to, or academic experts to industry exposure. So what was the most significant thing that you learned from your trip? If you know, if there's one thing, what did you really take away from those 4 months?
I think really one thing I did notice from visiting ITC is that Australia really is at the forefront of some of the challenges that we're seeing in regards to renewable energy integration. And Australia really has an opportunity to lead the way in this area on a number of fronts, and it really should make the most of that opportunity. From a technical perspective too, it's really important to consider that the underlying physics of the power system isn't overlooked. So market mechanisms definitely have their place in specific contexts. However, it's really clear that these mechanisms shouldn't override the system's physics and its original operational design.
I'm sure there's many power engineers nodding their head on, yeah, you can't escape the physics of the systems. But yeah, and yeah, we are at the forefront of the challenges and the solutions. So I suppose in terms of giving you a foundation for a future career, and that was a key part of Terry's values, was supporting young leaders and developing their careers. What's the most impactful outcome for the next stage in your career for you? Will you be shooting off to the States, or what's the most impactful outcome?
Well, while I was there, I was able to glean a lot of new knowledge, and as part of that, I was able to incorporate some of this new knowledge into a frequency control white paper, which I finalized while I was over in Michigan. What this has really allowed me to do now is sort of in my own time, branch out from my core sort of technical studies that I'm doing as part of my PhD, and really start to examine other topics in the energy sphere, such as policy, energy security, and resilience. So I guess this opportunity has really given me these new opportunities which have come, and hopefully in the future, once I've graduated from my PhD and got some sort of core practical experience as an engineer, it would be great to sort of branch out and look at the energy sector from a higher level in regards to some of the issues affecting policy and energy security, etc.
No, I'm sure that's very much what the partners of the award were hoping, of taking that strong technical knowledge and developing it further, but then broadening it out. So that's great. So I suppose in terms of shaping what you're doing right now, it's strengthened some of your PhD work because it gave you that deep technical understanding, but it positioned you for other options as well. So fantastic. Now, you and I have talked offline about your experience, and you've written your report, and for me, one of the great things about your trip was both that industrial and technical knowledge, but also the broader opportunities and that sense of being able to engage in a different culture and different way of life and different activities and you know, things that people do. And I suppose noting for everyone, as we must, that this is a pre-COVID-19 photo set. Jack sent through some photos that I might just pop up on the screen, and if you wanted to share with us, Jack, what you were able to do as extracurricular activities during your 4 months in the States.
Yeah, well, I was really lucky. Ian, while I was over there, really encouraged me to get out and experience some of the local culture, I suppose. So the top left photo there is from my hotel room in Atlanta from the Power and Energy Society General Meeting. The top middle is a photo from a preseason basketball game with the University of Michigan and Houston Baptist. The top right photo is some very early snow. I think it was late October, early November. We had multiple inches of snow and the temperature dropped to -16 Celsius, which was a bit of a shock happening so early. And then on the bottom row, we have bottom left is the University of Michigan versus Ohio State, which is sort of the biggest rivalry in American college football for Michigan. The middle was my sort of last week in the US. Ian very kindly invited me to have Thanksgiving dinner, which is a big tradition in the US, with his wife, his son, and some of his family friends. And then the bottom right-hand picture is the University of Michigan itself. It's the quad at the University of Michigan.
Yeah, interesting. I think for people who might be considering applying for the award themselves, you can show that there's a lot of opportunity to really connect. I suppose, did these side experiences, how did they add to the outcome of your trip, and will they shape your future direction in any way? Do you think you'll become a much nicer host for visitors, or how?
That's a good question. Yeah, well, it definitely provided a more well-rounded experience for a start. It also allowed me to gain a good insight into what it's like to live in the US, and it also allowed me to develop my personal and professional contacts a lot more than if it was just a short, like purely technical trip, for example, which definitely could be beneficial in the future by having sort of a broader network of contacts. And it also as well helped me establish a good working relationship with Ian at the University of Michigan, which could definitely be helpful in the short term, at least with my PhD studies, definitely.
And yeah, building those connections is also always really interesting.
Very important, yeah.
So, for the award is focused on developing your knowledge and skills. I think we can see it's certainly done that and given you a lot of opportunity. But a really important part of it is that sharing of knowledge. And I suppose for the benefit of those watching the webinar, we've already had Jack speaking to the API board and to the 32 participants that came to the API's quite famous 2-week-long residential summer school that we held in Queensland earlier this year. And Jack's also done a number of other things to share what he's learned. But we also had Jack to document in a formal report that we've shared with our API members. And I wanted to ask Jack some of his reflections here. So I suppose our two main categories were what would you give advice to senior leaders and managers in terms of what do we need to think about based on your experience? And the other is advice for young professionals like yourself and students who, what are you seeing? So I suppose touching on those two, first off, from your deep dive, what's your advice to senior leaders? What should they be taking note of based on your experience?
I guess one point is that all industries, but especially the energy industry, is really moving at a rapid pace now. And this is really driven by technological change and development. So we really need to be proactive rather than reactive to identify and tackle some of the problems associated with this change. And one good way of really doing this is by using data in unique ways to inform decisions. So obviously we have more and more data that's being collected now. So one thing would be to really find new ways to use this data to drive outcomes. While I was in the US too, I also noted that there's very good connectedness between industry and academia. And having increased connectedness between these two bodies really helps us to improve how we traverse certain problems. And lastly, one thing we discussed while I was at ITC was that the retention of knowledge and know-how from generation to generation of the workforce is really vital to businesses and the industry. And therefore, we really need some solid systems to be in place, which ensure that this knowledge is passed on from those very experienced employees to those newer to the industry.
Great, and that's certainly one of the roles that the API has, is transferring that knowledge between generations. I mentioned the summer school, but we're also looking at how we can use, say, this webinar platform and other things to, again, have more intergenerational sharing of knowledge. So I suppose based on those observations of where you see the sector moving, what recommendations and tips and ideas would you share with other young professionals or students and people who are thinking of starting their career in the power sector, given the changes and opportunities you see?
I guess, like I said before, data is becoming increasingly valuable to companies. So having software skills, or at the very least, digital literacy, will be very important. So for example, perhaps just a good familiarity with Python or another language. Cybersecurity is also going to be a potential vulnerability for future networks, which are increasingly connected. And therefore, we're going to definitely need people to be aware of this and have skills to ensure that power system resilience is maintained. And we're also experiencing, I should say, a large shift in generation to more decentralized inverter-based generation within power systems, which means that we're really going to require new professionals coming into the industry to have a very good understanding of inverter dynamics, modeling, operation and controls. I guess as a broad overview, new professionals or younger professionals will really require complex problem-solving skills and creativity to overcome some of the issues driven through the rapid change in the industry.
Yeah, and they're common themes that we hear, but I think it's always good to then tie that more specifically to particular developments of, you know, what in this, because it's very easy to say, yeah, we've heard all that before, but as we get detailed technical areas, we can say, yes, we certainly need creativity, but in this way. So thank you for your report comments and sharing that there. What I'd like to shift to now is, so you've had the benefit, you've had the great experience. You're the first ever T.J Effeney Award winner, but the program continues. So we have our second recipient, Lachlan, is actually over in the UK at the moment. And in July, we'll be opening up applications for the third round of the scholarship. So I suppose, do you have any tips for people who are looking to apply? How did you go about building your proposal? And, you know, given that you went overseas, if people don't have international connections but they're keen to go overseas, how would you recommend that people go about doing that? But I just want to throw up a slide first to show some of the facts around the T.J Effeney Scholarship. What am I sharing? I've confused myself, everyone. Hang on.
Well, David, oh, you got it.
There we go. Yeah. So yeah, Jack, I'll just, before you chat, so the scholarship is $20,000 for a professional development activity. It does not need to be overseas. It can be domestic or international. Our first two have gone overseas, but particularly given COVID-19 restrictions, it's equally viable to do a domestic activity. It's restricted to API bursary students who've already gone through a selection process to be selected as an API bursary scholar. And if you are interested, you can actually access Jack's proposal from a couple of years ago on the API website. And the process will open on the 1st of July and close at the end of September for applications for next year. So you'll submit a proposal for what you want to do and the initiatives, and the key judging criteria is how does it broaden your knowledge and skills in the energy sector? How does it increase your personal network of professional contacts? And how do you plan to share your knowledge and benefit with others? So Jack, as the inaugural recipient, what wisdom have you got for others out there?
Well, for me and my proposal, I guess the first thing when crafting my proposal was I thought, what do I want to get out of it? What sort of knowledge do I want to gain from the experience? And then based on that, I then identified who I could achieve that with and where the location is basically of where I'd like to carry out these tasks. So for me, I was quite lucky in the sense that I'd met Ian very briefly when he was in Melbourne not too long ago, not too long before I became aware of the award. So basically, having identified the knowledge that I'd like to get out of it, and I thought he would be someone I'd really like to work with, I reached out to him to basically scope out some possible opportunities relating to the work that I'd had in mind. And then once he confirmed that it would be possible, I then started to explore other opportunities more broadly that he suggested, because he obviously has the local knowledge there. So that's sort of how I managed to sort of create quite a broad program. Was I had one idea in mind, but then I also got the local knowledge there where there were other opportunities that I could go and pursue. So for me, it was going to ITC in Michigan.
Yeah, and I think so maybe some advice there to people who might not have yet run into someone like Ian at a conference or something is they do have contacts already in their network, whether they've done a placement with an industry placement as a bursary holder or through their university and others, and to connect through those contacts to find ideas and then to weave that into a proposal. Can you share any practical things to look out for, do you think, in terms of putting a proposal together? I know you and I spoke a little bit about the timing of securing relevant visas and the like, so that you wouldn't be able to go the day after the API said, yes, you're the recipient. So yeah, any tips there?
Yeah, definitely be aware that visas can take a substantial amount of time and effort to receive, not only in money for applications, but also things like certifying documents, completing forms, attending visa interviews, sending passports away to get the visa put into it, getting letters from your host. So that's definitely, there's a bit of a lead time there. And the other one, I guess, would be also consider accommodation. In certain places, it can be very difficult to find accommodation, especially if it's only for a short amount of time. So I guess factor in sort of the time needed to plan and account for these sort of things along the way. And as part of that, I guess I'd really look at, for accommodation particularly, maybe trying to use your local contacts to find out where might be a good place where you can stay, things like that, to save a bit of time.
And as you say, it doesn't have to be an international trip coming up, but I think that same, and not saying we need visas at the moment, but certainly there are travel restrictions that you may wish to consider. So thank you, Jack. What we're going to do now is switch into our Q&A mode. So just Kendall touched on it earlier, but just on the screen I'm showing, you can see there should be a Q&A little icon on your screen somewhere. And in that, you can type in your questions, and Jack and Kendall and I will be able to see those. And I'll put them up to Jack, and Kendall will moderate them in the background. At this stage, we don't have any questions coming up, so please.
Hi, David. We do have a couple questions. They've
great.
through the panelist section on the Q&A.
Okay.
We might have to investigate the features in the Q&A in the future, but if you go to your panelist chat, we've got a few.
Great. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing that then so we can see panelists. Okay, there we go. Thank you, everyone. I can see some questions Let me go. So as someone who is interested in DERs, I'm hoping you can share any insights to the FCAS control used in the US and Hong Kong and how that might differ to Australia. So we've hit you with a technical question straight off the bat, Jack.
That's a good question. It's not something I'm very sure of. I know in the research sort of realm, there has been a lot of work done, especially in the US, looking at how we can use, for example, demand response in controlling system frequency. But practically, I'm not sure of, I didn't come across anyone who discussed sort of practical implementation of DERs for frequency control.
Oh, thank you. So that was from, who was that from? That was from Jim Coates. So Jim, if you've got a follow-up, let us know. Another one, Tran says, please tell us about the renewable energy development in the US and how does the US transmission system cope with the injection of renewable energy, such as from rooftop solar? And just as a side one, he's asking, does the API work with generation industry as well? And yes, we do. We cover the whole power sector. So CS Energy, for example, is one of our members who do operate generation resources as well. So Jack, to your question, how does the US handle renewable energy penetration into the transmission system?
Yeah, there's certainly parts of the US that has high amounts of renewable energy, such as California. Where I was in the Midwest, in regards to ITC transmission, they operate across quite a few states, Iowa being probably the one with the most renewable energy. It has large amounts of wind, mainly because it's quite a flat terrain with lots of sort of farmland. One thing I sort of noticed when I was at ITC was that they sort of had predicted quite well ahead of time where large amounts of renewables could be potentially connected into their infrastructure, and they had already built infrastructure which could cope with large amounts of renewable energy coming online before it had actually sort of come to fruition, which was quite impressive. In regards to rooftop solar, I obviously didn't really see much in Michigan, but obviously in California and places like that where the weather's a bit more conducive to solar PV, they probably have quite large amounts of solar.
So we've got some questions about you, Jack. So thank you for your presentation from Adam. After completing your PhD, are you looking to remain in academia and research or move into industry? And what kind of research or industry work are you most interested to be involved in moving forward?
It's a good question. I think, like, I'm quite open-minded. If I had to choose one, I'd say I'd probably err towards going to industry. However, I guess I'll have to see what sort of opportunities wait for me once I finish. In terms of research work, at the moment, my research is sort of at the intersection of power electronic inverters, power system dynamics, and power system modeling. So that's sort of what I'm interested in at the moment, is seeing how we can develop more appropriate models for inverters and sort of the dynamics associated with inverter-dominated grids.
Great. Got another question about you. Are you open to connecting with bursary students through LinkedIn?
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyone can reach out, add me as a connection and send me a message if they have any questions. It's no problem.
And we're all about those connections. So a question for the API, does the API support all engineering disciplines such as chemical engineering or electrical only? So I think well, I'll give you a broad answer first. So we used to be very strongly about electrical engineering, but because of a lot of the things Jack spoke about, the power sector now requires a very broad skill set. So we're no longer just about electrical engineers, and we're not just about engineers as well. So we're certainly very strong on the engineering skill set and the aligned to engineers, but we're also interested in people who are doing degrees in, say, data science, and how, as Jack mentioned, how do we use all of that data that we've got to develop outcomes. That said, we are still aligned to the interests of our member organisations, because they're the ones that will ultimately be employing our bursary students. And so through our bursary student recruitment process, that's done by our industry members, and they're both looking for that mindset and that passion for the power sector, but also a particular skill set. So it's certainly a yes to more broad than electrical engineers, but in terms of specific disciplines such as chemical engineering or others, it's difficult to say whether there's a specific appetite for that skill set. But I will give you an example. So hadthe is a senior engineer within Ergon, who are one of our partners. And Heidi's on our board, and she was actually speaking in a different webinar last week, and she mentioned the fact that she is a process engineer, but in a very electrical engineering oriented portfolio, but she sees really strong demand for her process engineering skills because we're developing much more of a systems approach to our power systems now. So
I might just add to that, David, and emphasize the passion. It's about the passion for the energy sector. So if you're thinking about applying for the API bursary, you're an undergrad studying, and you're not exactly an electrical, mechanical, or a data science type role, and you are questioning it, feel free to send us an email. But if you're passionate about working with any of the diverse roles within the energy sector within Australia, definitely apply, because that's what we're looking for. And that's what our member companies are looking for. Like Jack mentioned, data science, Internet of Things, those disciplines are highly sought after by our member companies now and by the industry as a whole. So we're trying to diversify the intake of the next generation as well. So definitely apply and just provide background into the passions.
Yeah. We've got a question about the T.J Effeney Scholarship. So it's more around, so we've said the eligibility criteria must be an API Bursary Scholar. So the first question might be, well, how do you become one of those? And I'll touch on that in a moment. The next is you have to be in the last 2 years of your study. So this person's question is because they're doing a double degree. And so what I'm going to say is we'll contact you offline and just clarify that in terms of that eligibility. But the process is, put together your proposal for some fantastic development for yourself, and we'll be opening the applications for the T.J Effeney Award in July, but we'll share some more information about that process as we move forward. So just checking some other questions. I've got one question of, is the API seeking any new industry partners, and what are some of the aspects you're looking for? The short answer is absolutely yes. And what we're looking for in a partner is an organisation that is committed to helping develop a big picture approach to the workforce development of the power sector. We cover from, as I said, primary school up to the working professionals. So a commitment to that collective benefit and development of a workforce for the power sector, but also who has an interest in developing their own staff. And that's both grads and working professionals. It's about diversity, it's about inclusion in the workforce and a strong capability. So I've had a question for you, Jack. Could you share a little bit about your placement at Ergon in particular, and I suppose, and Wilson Transformers as well? What was, in terms of being an API bursary student, it'd be great to hear how those placements were of value to you and how they contributed to where you are today.
Yeah, well, in January and February 2016, I undertook a 2-month placement with Wilson Transformers, where I worked within the test department, mainly across 2 projects, one on earthing and one on control systems. And I was also able to obviously take part in the testing of their transformers as well while I was there. And then November 2016 through to February 2017, I worked for Ergon, where I worked on the Caulfield to Dandenong level crossing removal project, which was a multi-billion-dollar project in Melbourne basically removing level crossings for the trains and upgrading their rail infrastructure. So as part of that, I worked in the substation design team, where I primarily undertook preliminary and detailed design for greenfield and brownfield traction power substations. So from these placements, I guess I really developed new technical skills, definitely new knowledge. So I learned about how they actually test transformers, how to design an earthing system for a substation, protection studies, and how sort of the preliminary and detailed design processes work. But more than that, I also learned about how to manage my own time and my workload, and definitely felt a sense of accountability when I was working at Ergon. They were really supportive of sort of pushing me to learn more and to sort of get in amongst the work and get a lot of stuff done. So it was overall a really fantastic experience at both partners.
Great. I've got two more questions. So one is, what is the best way to gain an insight and understanding of the dynamics and modelling of inverter energy systems and the control systems around them? You've done some diving on that, Jack?
So they are asking how to learn more about it, is it? Or?
Yeah, I think so. What's the best way to gain an
Okay.
insight and understanding of them, of the dynamics?
Okay. I suppose if you're sort of new to the area, definitely reading at least a few research papers. It's not something that's really taught much, it seems, in universities. So from what I've read this year, I've definitely had to get up to speed on it. At least reading through some papers to get a basic understanding of how they work and what they're doing helps. If you have sort of simulation software where you can sort of build the controllers for an inverter and then run a simulation, and you really get a sense of how they operate and sort of what dynamics are more dominant than others, for example, is a really good way to do that. So there's lots of different electromagnetic transient programs that you could use if you have licenses to them, just to help solidify sort of concepts.
Got a career question for you, Jack. What was your next steps after you graduated from your degree, and what would you recommend for a student in their final year?
Next steps, I plan once I graduated, if I go into industry, I'd really like to work towards getting chartered as quickly as possible. Once I've sort of feel like, once I've been chartered and I feel very comfortable with sort of my technical skills, I guess then I'll start looking at how I can participate in the industry in maybe more non-technical ways. In terms of what I recommend for a student in their final year, I suppose it's always good to have an idea of what you would like to do when you finish. I was sort of in between two minds, and it worked out for me, but I know it would have been a lot less stressful if I had very sort of solidified idea of what I'd like to do. So I guess it's just that. Final year, I guess if you're looking for jobs and things like that, it would be very beneficial to work on your personal network. It's definitely potentially an easier way to get a job rather than going through sort of grad applications as well. So if you do know someone or familiar with them, it does help to sort of have a foot in the door potentially in the application processes, since there's such a large volume of people.
All right, I've got one final question. So it's an API question. So it's more about, do we see momentum from our partners who are primarily generators or in the grid space to move into utility storage? And is there demand for students who are keen on that direction? Look, I'd certainly say that there is an appetite across a whole range of employers, including those in the grid space, to understand how to integrate these types of, as you describe, utility storage. So Kendall can clarify for me, but with our summer school that we run every year, so it's a 2-week-long residential, very deep technical, but also about market and strategic transformation of the power sector. This was an issue that came up quite a lot, and we did a site to I'm going to go and say it was Energex, but Kendall can clarify for me, where the network operator is also doing a utility storage for rooftop solar and batteries. Kendall, am I on the money there?
Yes, yep, I believe that's accurate.
Yeah, so certainly there's an appetite within the organisations because they might be doing projects themselves, but they're also well aware that they have to be able to work with these systems if they're developed by other operators or players. So yeah, there is a strong appetite at the moment to handle these types of developments in the grid. Someone described it really well at our summer school of describing our power network a bit like our current traffic system, where all the roads and all the traffic lights and all the signs and all the cars are designed around driving in one particular direction. And now we're developing cars that can drive backwards and forwards equally easily. But the problem is the roads and everything around it is still configured to everyone drives forward through the front window of their car. So, you know, we have to make sure that the system as a whole can operate with things like utility storage or distributed batteries or virtual batteries, real batteries, etc. So yeah, there's a lot of appetite for handling these things. So I might wrap it up in terms of the questions there and just close out on a couple of other things. And then I'll have some final questions for Jack. So what I'm going to do now is move things around on my screen because there's a lot. And yeah, so just to recap, so we talked about the API Bursary Program. For those who might not know, so the API member organisations contribute funding, and there's a $4,000 scholarship. That's $1,000 a year over 4 years for scholars. We're recruiting 25 of these scholars around Australia this year for students who are studying qualifications at universities in Australia. But for me, the real value is not, you know, some money is always good, but the real value is that our bursary scholars are directly linked with our employer community for opportunities to do summer placements. And Jack mentioned his two at Ergon and Wilson. But so you get that industry experience, which is fundamental to working out what you want to do and getting there. But we also build a broader community as we're doing now. And there's other exclusive opportunities like applying for the T.J Effeney Scholarship. So those applications are open right now and closing in a couple of weeks. And in 2 weeks' time, our next webinar will actually feature some of our past bursary students like Jack, who are now out in industry, and they'll share a bit more insight into applying for and making the most of your experience as a bursary student, and also what types of career paths there are out there for people who are passionate about the power sector. So stay tuned on our LinkedIn page or our Facebook page or wherever else. So I suppose that's just, yeah, if you want to find us on social media, it's the Australian Power Institute. You can also look up me, David Pointing, if you want to follow me on LinkedIn as well, and Kendall and my emails are there if you want to get in touch with us. And as we said before, T.J Effeney Awards will open up again in July, and we'll share information about them then. I'll just kick back to Jack for, I suppose, final opportunity to say, I suppose, any last comments from you, Jack? Anything, I suppose, some questions? Why should someone apply for a bursary scholarship with the API?
Well, the bursary program's a fantastic opportunity for students, obviously, to develop new skills, both hard and soft. But as you said before, it's really beneficial in gaining important exposure and experience within industry, which will directly help you become more employable in the future. I think that's really the key takeaway for bursary students.
Yep. Why pursue a career in the power sector at all?
Well, the sector's really undergoing, as you said before, rapid change. And this really is an interesting time to be in the sector. There's a lot going on. It's very broad, which makes it very exciting and varied to work in. And I guess we really are trying to address, I guess, existential issues now, and try and improve sort of society as a whole and how we function. So it's a really good time and an interesting time to be in the energy sector.
Yeah, I would describe it as if you want to change the world, but work in an industry that really has a lot of resources and capability and structure. The power sector is amazing because you can have a very stable conventional job, or you can have a really innovative job, all within the same organisation or the same sector, and have a really interesting career. So I suppose any final comments, questions from yourself to us, the audience?
Well, firstly, I guess I would just like to really thank the API and Mike Griffin for their support of my personal development over the past few years. And specifically thanks to the API, Energy Queensland and the Effeney family for the support that they've given and continue to give towards this award. It really is a fantastic opportunity to help the younger generation in the sector. And I guess personally also a big thanks to Ian Hiskins, who hosted me at the University of Michigan. It was a fantastic experience, so thanks to him for all his help.
Well, thank you very much for your contributions today. It's really been appreciated. I think it's been a great conversation, and I hope everyone's gained some value from it. So thank you, Jack. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
And to everyone else out there, look, thanks for joining us. Sorry we started late, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. And we will send you a survey form, so please, we'd appreciate any feedback you have. And as I said, follow us on the socials to get more information about what's coming up with applications for the bursary scholarships, the next webinar, and the T.J Effeney Award when it opens up. Otherwise, thank you very much for joining us for our first API Industry Insights webinar.